So before we have the slides that David ably produced for his discussion, I just want to open with a very interesting question. Are democratic values and market forces generally opposed to each other?
Democratic forces and?
Market forces and democratic values.
Okay. That's an interesting place to start. Personally, I don't think they are opposed to each other, only that they facilitate each other or should facilitate each other. However, what we see is market forces and money has a way of dictating how democracy should look like or looks like instead of how it should be. Because resources and markets are supposed to facilitate economies and all of us earn a living and trade. However, when they are misused to guide, quote unquote, politics and democracy, that is where we have a challenge. And we may have examples of where in our region here, for anybody to get elected and you don't have proper financial muscle, whether it's in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and the region in general, it becomes very difficult.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that answer. And the question I'd like to ask is, where are our political leaders, the 25,000, for example, in Kenya, where are they getting this money? Because I don't know any business that they have established, and they have millions of dollars to run these campaigns. And perhaps, Kizito, you can answer that question for us.
Good afternoon, comrades. I hope we enjoyed our lunch, because as we come to discuss money, I think food is part of accountability. And if you didn't, it's the best time to raise your voices democratically, and I trust that you'll be heard. I prepared a few visuals, and you know, this being the evening session after food, kind of the energy levels tend to drop. Some of us prefer to call them sugar levels. So what I'd prepared was something similar to democracy under threat. And you know, it's very hard to discuss issues of politics in isolation with money, especially in the current trend of events. Back in the days, politics used to be a service. But now, politics is a full-time employment opportunity. So people no longer go in politics because of serving, but they go there because of the lucrative opportunities they can have. My colleague here was asking, why is it that so many people, comedians, musicians, everyone else is interested in running into our Ugandan politics? And you know, politicians have tainted this image that there is a lot of money in politics and there is a lot of political rewards. So everyone who is failing in their career, they are resorting to, you know, going into politics. And in our country, even made it worse, and I'm sure even other countries it's the same, that to join politics, you must first retire from your current job. So that means that if I've been a doctor and I've been earning 5 million, the reward vis-a-vis what I'm currently earning is higher and forcing me to join. So it's now, you have to draw the line beyond between your career and what happens. And when we come to the first question about democracy and markets, you know, these are two distinctive features, but then the interplay is supposed to be, you know, solid. So when you intend to front the democratic values, of course, you have participation, you have all these issues of accountability, you have everything on one side. Then when it comes to market forces, you know, demand and supply, and it's survival for the fittest. Now, when you come and join the two, I think that's where now we are currently in the mess. That because there is a lot of political demand on this side, but also the fact that even the politicians are now using their power to suppress the other side of the market, the businesses, procurement, supplies, and the rest. Now we find ourselves boxed in the corner that even the market itself is now sitting at the value, at the mercy of the politicians. I'll give, there are so many examples we've seen, I think, even in the region. For example, in Uganda, every time we go into running a campaign, like we are going into our next political phase, every business person who is opposed to the government, come 2026, they'll either be slapped with high tax assessments, or some of them will get out of business. So the trend has been that the market then has to fuse with the current reigning regime. And after 2026, my colleagues here will testify that we had over 18 companies, and some of these are actually billionaires, who now came for rewards through tax exemptions and, you know, tax expenditure from government, because they had actually supported government to run in the 2016 presidential campaigns and all this. Now, this marginalizes the market, and of course the markets lose their independence and integrity, but also it contributes to now the business integrity itself, that now many businesses, especially the small and, you know, medium businesses, find it hard to favorably compete, because then the politicians tend to flow the procurement processes and all these in favor of their few circle of business friends. So the discussion of democratic values and markets, I think it's deeper, and it's a discussion we can always have beyond the site. But also, from our experience, and I think even in other countries across the region, we've seen lots of lobbying activities, where now businesses are lobbying the politicians that actually they took into power to work in their favor. We've seen, for Ugandans, I'll use my example. We've seen Sudil in the early between I think 2011, 2015, we had a school, Shimoni, whose land was given away. And the promise was that they were going to construct, what was it? A playground or something of sort. Later on, they constructed a high-rise building, which is actually private building. Now, this land was given to a private businessman, Sudil. But the initial promise was a playground or something of sort. Later on, it turned out that actually Parliament is spending over 9 billion Uganda shillings per year. 9 billion is about 2.7 million US dollars. It's between that per year to rent from a project whose land was donated to the investor. But to make it even worse is that Parliament has a project going on to construct its own premises. But for over so many years now, that project is still stalling. But they are spending money to rent from a private individual whose land was donated. And the same individual was still given more land to construct a conference center. And we were promised shares as government when we were hosting CHOGAM in around 2007. So we never got the return on our share capital. But then coming to NAN, the non-aligned movement, we gave the same individual more money to expand the facility so that we can host the NAM, but still we are not getting return on investment. So when you have such lobbying activities by business personnel with, you know, the politicians that they put into power, you have some compromises, because what government offers is taxpayers' money. And all of our countries in East Africa, we are getting to a point where our debt is unsustainable. So when you pay your taxes and the tax is benefiting a private individual, and it's not in your interest, of course now the game of fair play becomes a challenge. But also, you have issues of unfair distribution of income. So you have the super rich getting richer, but then you have the super poor getting poorer. So we come now to the question of Gen Zs. You see, the middle class, the lower middle class, the lower middle class, and then probably I think we have the upper class. But in Uganda, I think we don't have classes. You're either rich or you're poor. Why I say that is that it takes you just one medical condition to land into poverty, you see. So that's how it is. And I'll use Uganda as an example, but it's across the region. Today, if you got an accident, trust me, tomorrow, you'll be on the streets, either begging or your people will now have car wash campaigns to make sure that you can survive. Then coming to the question you asked, where are we getting the money? Are these slides moving? Please, my face is not as important as the slides. So where are we getting the money? There is a slide that shows some figures. I think it's the next slide. So at Transparency International, we always run what we call the Corruption Perceptions Index, CPI. It ranks countries according to their perceived levels of corruption. Now, in 2019, then 2021, we made an analysis of the interplay between politics and corruption. And we noted that most of the countries that are democratic tend to have some sanity when it comes to fighting corruption. Unfortunately, Sub-Saharan is the worst performer in the entire globally. When you rank us all together, we perform worst in fighting corruption. It's only one country, Rwanda, that is above both the global average and the Sub-Saharan average, because it scored 57 in this year. Now Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, DRC, South Sudan is even worse, and Somalia, because now we are in the same region. Those are around 11 and 13, they never exceed, out of 100. When we speak of Corruption Perception Index, the rank doesn't matter. Out of 180 countries, that doesn't matter. It's the score, what you get out of 100, because then that determines your performance. So when you look at Sub-Saharan, I'll give you an example of South Sudan. What's happening when it comes to democracy? I think since 2011, South Sudan, you haven't had an election. When it comes to DRC, the continuous wars, the conflicts, and the movement of illicit money, you know, the illicit flows of mineral resources, that affects their democracy, and that's a given. When it comes to Uganda, we haven't had peaceful transfer of power since 1962. That's as fun as it is, but as factual as still it is. Because when we got our first prime minister, then we got into Obote, then Obote was ousted, then we had Amin, and it's been the same. The only peaceful transfer of power we've had is transferring from the same president to the same president. That's how funny it can be. When it comes to Rwanda, of course, Rwanda is affected by issues of secrecy, same as Tanzania. So when you speak of corruption, then democracy, those are some of the major interplays that affect them there. So why I bring this is, we can't separate corruption from democracy. But also the fact that the corrupt use now these illicit finances they get from the system to then fund their political campaigns. When you look at, I think it's the fourth slide, you can skip the next because I've spoken to it already. Where are our African leaders hiding the money? There was an analysis that was done by Transparency, that was 2024-23. And it showed that about, actually it's a tip of the iceberg, 3.7 billion US dollars is hidden by, Africans somewhere. But most of the individuals named in these illicit funds are actually either African leaders or sons of African leaders. DRC, then the Republic of Congo, then you have some guys in Angola. They loot, either exploit the natural resources, exploit the contracts, and then what happens? They'll spend their money in foreign jurisdictions. That money comes back towards the elections, now to fund your political campaigns. And now, as we speak the money in Uganda, our last election, we spent about $1.09 billion. And it's worse than Kenya, because you guys were at around 1.8 or more. That's campaign expenditure known to what the government appropriates to the elections. Now, to make it worse, our president spent over a trillion when it comes to presidential campaigns. And these figures, Cheptum will share with your paper, you'll see the figures. But an MP here in Kenya, I think you spend about 150,000 US dollars to 200,000 US dollars in Kenya to run for, you have governors and things like that. You spend about that. In Uganda, we spend about 111,000 US dollars to run for parliamentary elections. Now, 111,000 amongst us, if you wanted to run for, I don't know by show of hands who would afford that money to finance your political campaign. I'm sure none of us. My colleague Michael here will tell you that that's on the average, because we have parliamentary candidates who spend as much as 1 million US dollars, one parliamentary candidate. Now you have about 523 members of parliament. You can imagine how much illicit financing you're going to have. But this then comes back into inflation at the end of the political cycle. But beyond that, we've also, I think, allowed certain laws, and I think as you discuss constitutional reforms, this is also very key, that telling a youth to spend about 6,000 US dollars to get nomination to run for a political race, that's really insensitive. That's obscene. Exactly, it's obscene. Because most of us, you'd want to offer yourself to give a service, to make change. But if that change comes with a price, that means you have to find illegitimate ways, first of all, to finance your expenditure. And once you get there, then you have to get your money back. Recently, we had issues with our members of parliament who were rewarded over, I want to put it in dollars, 100 million Uganda shillings into dollars. That's about 30,000 US dollars. Just free money to go and, they named it to go and monitor government programs, but yet we already give them a salary to go and monitor the same programs. So where does the money come? The money mainly comes from corruption. It comes from illicit sources. It comes from lobbyists. It comes from corporations. Then it's a little percentage of it that comes from loans and clean sources. But basically, that's where the money comes from. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And I'd like to recognize a special friend. We have our Chief Justice Emeritus, Willie Mutunga, has walked in. I think perhaps you can just say a jumbo to the comrades, just say hi. And his message is don't get abducted. Just say something. Oh, he doesn't want to say something? All right. Asante sana CJ Emeritus for coming. And we are talking about money and politics. And I like that David has identified the problem that they're getting money through corruption, through illicit financing, and a very small amount is from taking loans. And my question to Alex is, it's a more solution-oriented question, is how can we curb the use of illicit financing in our political economy as we see it?
Thank you for that good question. I want to paint the picture that our region faces when it comes to illicit financial flows. Currently, as you may be aware, under the Financial Action Task Force listing, Kenya is currently grey listed. Tanzania, DRC, South Sudan, they have been identified to have strategic deficiencies in terms of their laws on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism. Uganda, interestingly, has just they were removed from the grey list recently. They were in the list, but recently they were removed from that list. And then what we've been seeing in the region, even some of the conflicts that are there in the region, we see a situation where especially Nairobi is used as a conduit for some of those trades, whether it is minerals coming from DRC or weapons going into Sudan and gold coming out of Sudan to other destinations. This will not happen if we have, one, proper laws, two, political goodwill. The recent case of Sudan that was in all media stations in the region indicates a situation where the political class here provide a mechanism through which illegally there would be trading of some items, gold or whatever it is, ivory and other things. I think not long ago we saw high-valued wood being sold from South Sudan through Uganda and other places, and it's exported. All these are sources of the illicit flows, money flows, that will then be used for politics. Now, one, the FATF listing is one of the good things that we have. But the problem with it is once your country is grey listed, then the people who suffer first are the citizens. Right now for Kenya, we should be very careful when you are traveling, because some of your cards may not be very useful in the near future. You will have challenges transacting with your cards when you are out of this country. So we get affected directly. On the other hand, my colleague here did talk about issues of debt distress for most of the countries in the region. What we are seeing increasingly is domestic debt is on the rise. The case of Kenya, domestic debt has overtaken external debt. What is interesting is when you look at how we accrue domestic debt in the region, you will find that every other political regime, there are certain entities that benefit from that stock of domestic debt. Here in Kenya, you can do your research and see what happened during the Kibaki regime. There is a certain bank that benefited more than others. Then when he exited, we got the Kenyatta regime. Then another bank benefited from most of the domestic debt stock. Now we're in another regime. The previous bank that was benefiting is not benefiting as much. Now we have another child, another kid on the block. Some of the laws that we have are being used for the benefit of those in authority. You will recall that recently in Kenya we lifted the moratorium for registration of banks. And now you need to ask yourself, who is registering a new bank and for what purpose? It is not you and I. He mentioned something about some entities getting preferential treatment when it comes to taxation. This again is linked to politics, and we've seen that in the region. Right now here in Kenya we have this very interesting affordable housing project. And we know now in the construction industry, when you look at even the way tax policy is being used from last year into this year, it is favoring a certain line to ensure that then the money that we are collecting from affordable housing levy finds its way into some quarters. I got quite interested a few days ago when our president was in Spain, and he was talking about domestic revenue mobilization and how much we have mobilized domestically for housing projects. For anybody who doesn't come from around this region, that would sound very nice and very interesting. And you would wonder what is wrong with Kenyans. Their president seems to be doing really well with domestic revenue mobilization. But if you ask anybody who is within this particular space, they will tell you that our disposable income is getting limited by the day. So my point is, if we don't have a good cure for our democracy and our politics, then some of the laws that we have will not be very useful to us. You saw this week in Kenya, we had an unprecedented passing of a constitutional amendment bill with zero debate. I think this is the first bill I've seen pass in that manner, with zero debate, just because it touches on some money that apparently is managed in some way by the politicians. And we are looking at now at the Senate here to see how things will play. So my view is FATF is a good thing, because the grey listing also ensures that at least you try to improve your laws on anti-money laundering and the flow of illicit finances. Currently in Kenya, we are having a process that the IMF is conducting, a governance and corruption diagnostic. One of the areas they are looking at anti-money laundering and CBK regulations, anti-corruption, rule of law, and so on. These are other good measures that we can make use of to ensure that then we minimize the illicit flows, because once we provide these avenues that money can easily flow through our countries, then corruption will not end. Because those who are corrupt know for sure, if I embezzle X amount of money, then there is a way in which I'm going to move the money outside the economy.
Thank you so much. And uncharacteristic of other panels, I'd like to open the floor to the audience.
But before we open,
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Just if we can push us, I think, to the 5th, or probably the 7th slide, just to supplement on what my colleague has said. When you look at that, maybe you can just project that and we go to the audience. You can read as the discussion goes on. But these are standards that we looked into that would promote political financing integrity. And these are based on about 6 parameters. I hope they are very clear there. Unfortunately not. Please, the slide. But one, we have transparency. We have issues of clean money. We have issues of level playing fields. I think we've discussed this. Then we have issues of gender equality. The ladies here know how serious that is, especially when it comes to issues of money and gender in politics. Then the other one is the fact that you need state neutrality. And this speaks to, when we come towards political campaign, we don't separate between the president and the candidate. Now what happens is the president uses the state machinery, government resources to campaign, which disadvantages the political candidate. So if we can speak to these standards, I think this is one of the starting points that can determine how far we can go in sanitizing our politics. Thank you.
Tesana, do we have any questions from the floor? I see Michael.
Thank you very much, panelists. I have a question. Of course, it bothers me that we spend a lot of money in that, and I think that's why people go for the elections. But the question to you both, is it possible to remove money from elections? And if it is not possible, is there a threshold? Because every election, it looks like money can never get out of elections. What do we do about that?
Thank you. Actually, very interesting to know about this business. For me, it's a business. And it interpreted why politicians stuck or insist to be in power. And I link this with rule of law. In Sudan, we don't have a law, rules, or govern taking loans from the institutions or from the banks. So every minister take loans, billions and billions. No one will ask him where or how he utilized this money, and it is just transferred to himself, or sometimes it never reached Sudan. It from that bank, and I think even the financial institution, they are corrupted as well. I can say it without any hesitation, because if the money in the name of Republic of Sudan, it has to go to central bank or Minister of Finance, not to other ministers, and they transfer this money to safe havens, Geneva or other places, Malaysia or Turkey, where the people, Sudanese people, they are. So I just wanted to, how we can have a legal framework to rule or to limit this continuous corruption. Thank you.
Let me attempt to respond to the questions. The first question, whether we can remove money from politics. My response to that is it would be practically difficult to remove money entirely from politics, because anybody who is campaigning, of course, you will need your ordinary fuel, an office to run, and other utilities. However, what we've seen in mature democracies, we have laws that limit how much you could spend on a particular level of election. I think in Kenya we did try to do that, but now enforcing and ensuring that we can track every other amount, that is where the challenge is. In other mature democracies, we also have regulations on how much you can get as sponsorship from one particular source. I think in our part of the region, we don't have that. So that then leaves room for those who have the money to even bankroll a candidate. And then what that tells you is that after this person gets into power, they will basically do whatever it is the person who bankrolled them is saying. I think there's a saying that he who pays the piper calls the tunes. So that is what we have in this part of the region. As far as my colleague will add something, as far as what our colleague from Sudan has said, the lack of laws that determine how loans are contracted and how that money comes into the country, that is a very huge gap that you have in your respective jurisdiction. In some other countries in the region, Kenya being a good example, we have laws that determine, our PFM Act determines how do you acquire debt, and debt is supposed to do what. And once you acquire debt, it's supposed, first of all, to hit the consolidated fund at the central bank. Then after that, then you have budgeting being done. But be that as it may, we have a good law, the PFM Act. Several countries in the region have come to Kenya to benchmark. But then we have a problem. Once you have done that very elaborate process, then when it comes to now the expenditure point, that is where now we have what we are seeing developing, we are calling it rentier capitalism, where now you have private sector, in quote, being used to move money from government to individual hands. That is another area that we need to legislate and ensure that those who come into power, then we don't have what is described in the morning as state capture.
I think starting from where you started, especially when it comes to politicians and access to finances, they are financial intelligence units, though they have been highly politicized in some of our countries, but it's normally the role of some of these financial intelligence units to work with financial institutions, trade flag some of these financial transactions. and of course red flag incidences of illicit financing. So that includes money laundering, issues of terrorism financing, and the rest. However, maybe the question for Sudan is, one, how strong is your financial intelligence unit? Then two, I think he has elaborately spoken to it, how strong are your frameworks on public investment management? So that includes public financing, contracting of loans, utilization of loans, because we used to have the same problem that would contract a loan before even having a plan on what we are going to use that money for. So you want to construct a road, but you borrow money without even having feasibility studies, you know, compensations. So by the time you start implementing a project, you've spent about 5 years paying interest on the loan. You get it? So now we have reviewed our laws to make sure that before a politician gets this loan, though it's not the role of politicians actually, but some of the loans are being politically driven. So before we get this loan, at least we have the entire project management approvals in place. Then when it comes to, it's a funny question, how do we get money out of politics? One, most of our politicians, we have never thought of having tax clearances for politicians. So someone comes with a fleet of cars, they own properties, but you don't know where these properties came from. Now, when you offer yourself as a sacrificial lamb, this should be the opportunity to know how much you have amassed this wealth. So through tax clearances, you're very able to trace illicit financing and licit money. Because what happens is illicit money never has a trail. When you get corrupt money, you don't have a trail of how it has been cleaned, unless you take it through a system of maybe real estate and that. But so many politicians come with unexplained wealth that if we were to offer tax clearances, we'll be able to track. But also the fact that we haven't thought about the issues of the legitimate campaign financing. For example, like I said, if I want to stand for parliament, why should I pay 3 million? Yet I'm a taxpayer who always pays money to my government. So I should actually offer my candidature, and that should be the starting point. Let's make politics less expensive, so that if my investment is minimal, I'll still expect a minimum reward. But if the investment is high, of course the reward will definitely be high. So if we can have a discussion on how we limit finances at entry, maybe we can then have another discussion on how we limit bankrolling at the other end. Then the other issue is in terms of political accountability. You know, political parties are supposed to tell us how they have used their funds, how much you received, how much you utilized, and how did you utilize that money. But you realize that most of our politicians will spend money on bribing voters, buying soap and that. And by the way, we haven't had stringent laws on donations during campaigns. That's another area to look at. People will promise ambulances, people will promise mattresses and things like that, and we never question that. So that should be part of the discussion, that during campaigns, politicians are not supposed to, you know, offer some of these promises, because that's part of now political expenditure. Then the other one is, of course, the entire transparency around campaign financing. The source should be very clear. Where are you getting the money? What's the purpose? So that then we are able to track conflict of interest. I'll give you the example of the US. Musk is doing what he's doing, but also is receiving the backlash because at least there was an element of transparency. So you know that this billionaire is being favored because he paid about 200 million US dollars to finance the president. So whatever he does, at least the public now knows. And then you're able to hold him to account. And I think people were trying to avoid the Teslas, SpaceX, and the rest because you know. Now, if we can't have that transparency here, that means these billionaires will always go scot-free and won't be able to know what happens behind the scenes. I think the other one, he has talked about it, reviewing limits on expenditure. That's very, very critical. I don't see a reason why a member of parliament should spend 111,000 US dollars in a campaign. What are you buying? What's your incentive? Why is it that a political race is a do or die, that you're willing to spend even up to your last penny to get through? You get it? We should have those legitimate expenditures that then we can limit our campaign financing to. I think the last one, I've talked about it, reviewing of the financial requirements, including tax audits for our political candidates and the political parties. I think that will go a long way in ensuring that, you know, we sanitize the politics. I think I'll first end it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And I have a question before my brother Jacob takes over. I like that you brought up the issue of billionaires, and you brought up the example of Elon Musk. And Elon Musk not only contributed financially to that campaign, he also used his media platform to promote that campaign. And I'd like to bring it closer back home, that for every senior politician, the first thing you acquire is a media platform. So for our context here in Kenya, the Standard and the Nation are owned by very influential political families. Very, very influential. And my question is about the billionaires. And there are billionaires from all over the world. How can we hold these billionaires accountable? Because they have financed our politicians, and they're not in any position of, they're not our elected leaders, but they're the ones who call the shots. Because in this broad-based government that we have right now, there are very suspicious fellows who are known to do suspicious business and have been put into cabinet. And the reason they are put into that cabinet is because of the dollars, the money that they've brought. So how can we hold them accountable, the billionaires themselves? I think, Thuku, you can give Jacob the...
I have... Hello? Oh, okay. Thank you very much. This is Jacob Emoid. One of the panelists, I think, mentioned something to do with our domestic debt. And my question is on the general public debt, actually. And this question, I think I've asked in some other forum, but I didn't get a very conclusive response. The President Mwai Kibaki, in 10 years, left us a debt of 1.2 trillion Kenyan shillings. And President Uhuru Kenyatta comes in, and in 10 years, he pushes that number to about 8.5 trillion Kenyan shillings. And President Ruto, in just 3 years, has pushed that figure to about 11.3 or 11.5 trillion Kenyan shillings. Now, if in every fiscal year we allocate about 70% of our revenue collection to service debt, like in every 100 shillings we collect, 70 shillings goes to debt repayment. I'm wondering, why is this figure not really reducing? Are we actually paying an actual debt as a country, or we are simply complicit in financing the corrupt? We are accusing our politicians of, you know, being guilty of. Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. The Kenyan public debt currently starts at around 11.4 trillion, 11.36 to be exact, of which over 6 trillion is domestic debt, and then 5 point something is external debt. When you look at our debt repayment for this fiscal year that we've just started, we are going to be spending around 1.3 trillion to pay our fiscal, our debt. However, in the same budget, we have a fiscal deficit of around 923 billion Kenya shillings. In my view, our ordinary revenue, what we are going to collect from taxes, is overestimated by around 250 billion. So for me, I would add the 923 billion to the 250 billion. That would take us to around almost 1.25 trillion. So essentially, by the close of the year, we will not have paid anything, because when you look at the 1.3 minus what we will accrue in this year, it cancels out. And there are instances where then actually that is just on the global figures that we have. But in the meantime, we are still acquiring other concessional debts that are project related. We are also continuously every other week acquiring additional domestic debt through T-bills and treasury bonds. So essentially, that number is not coming down. Instead of the number coming down, every other year we are increasing that number. That is why the number keeps on growing. The bigger challenge, and this affects most of the countries in the region, is when now this debt comes in and it is spent on areas where then it leaks out through corruption. So it means you are paying debts on money that the citizens will never accrue any interest on them. Then we have the other problem that was highlighted the other day by the Auditor General, and I think Kenya is even better than other countries in the region due to the levels of transparency in that area. Where we have acquired debt, I think we are in a similar problem like what Uganda used to be in, where you have acquired debt, you're not utilizing that money as fast as you should, then you end up paying interests on monies that never gave the citizens anything to accrue. And what our government has tried to do, we have the Public Investment Management Regulations of 2022 that are trying to streamline the whole process of how projects find themselves into the budget. However, we still have another bigger problem. I don't know whether this is the same case in Uganda and other countries in the region, where we spend a whole 10 months preparing the national budget, where all of us get to participate in the civil society, citizens, we riot, we do all these things, we do submissions. I'm one of those people who go to the Finance and Planning Committee to make submissions. But then all that goes to waste, where now, when we start implementing, then the government produces what is called a supplementary budget, which has zero or little to zero public participation. During now the supplementary budget process, which happens in the region, you'll find that we will have introduction of new policies, new projects, and things of that nature. So then the question you're asking tells you that the numbers that we are looking at now and what we will close with at the end of the financial year are totally different. That is why now our debt stock in this region will continue increasing, and unfortunately the citizens are not getting value for those debts. And in this country, we have the whole issue of odious debt and debts that were acquired, and we have I think you can read there's a publication called The Debt Treadmill in Kenya. You will get very interesting stories there of projects where we acquired debt with one of our partners. I don't want to mention names, and then money was lost, the project never happened, then we went back to the same partner and we were given new money for the same project. And it's quite a murky area. Thank you.
David, you can answer the question I had on the billionaires.
How can we have legal frameworks to limit political corruption, and how do we avoid billionaires, large money in politics? I think the starting point is where we had ended the discussion in limiting finance expenditure. Because then what happens is, why would you want 100 million shillings when your actual expenditure is going to be 10 million? You know, you already have that advantage. But also, I think increasingly, when it comes to now the other discussion of state capture, increasingly we see that oligarchs, the super rich, are highly having interest in political affairs. They don't want to run into politics, but they run the politics. So you find a shadow moving a body, someone on the side trying to influence things. Now, without safeguards like financing limits, safeguards like lobbying, limiting lobbying activities, because we have lobbyists, even in Uganda and everywhere. Michael here will come with a very nice project and is connected to a super rich, and he's like, this is how you're going to benefit. So if we can't have laws to lobby, to limit lobbying activities, that also becomes a problem. But also the fact that we need laws on fair play. The issues of ownership of media and media time. I think we had, was it a lawsuit against UBC at some point, the Uganda Broadcasting Corporation. They were giving more time to the current incumbent politicians during a campaign period, and it was disadvantaging the opposition candidates. So we said there should be fair play, even if it's my station, but I'm in a political race, I should allocate that time almost equally so that everyone is fairly represented. And if we have such laws, of course we shall promote fair competition. But without these laws, everyone acts as they wish. And I think for us, that's how far we can go. But also strengthening these financial intelligence units across the board to ensure that you know the sharing of intelligence, how much is coming in, what is it for, and how is it influencing the process. That should be very clear. Currently in Africa, I think it's very few countries that would have tried it, but it's not working. The only time FIA comes for you in Uganda is when you're either very anti-government, and I think we saw it during the suppression of Chapter 4, when they label us that we are financing subversive activities. So that's when you get issues. But otherwise, it's currently not targeting illegitimate financing. I think I may end it at that.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? They must have done a good job.
Maybe the question on public debt. World over, I think no country has ever been able to clear its debt. And if you look at all the states, even the US, it's actually shooting. If you go to Twitter and you see the current post that Musk showed, there's actually a spike in their debt. That at some point the curve was flat, then during the time of the current guy, it just shot extremely up. And in Africa, it was actually a big problem until we had the HIPC, highly indebted and poor countries, that we had to be forgiven our public debt. And if you analyze the pattern currently, I think most of the African countries are going towards that. Your government will fear to say that its debt unsustainability is high. It will fear to say that, but it's actually happening. Most of us have exceeded the debt to GDP ratio, but we have also exceeded the ratio where you shouldn't exceed the 50% mark. Now, most governments borrow expecting to either have a project that will offset. For example, in our country, we have the oil industry that we are promoting. So if you look at the pattern between 2011 and currently, our debt has been increasing because we thought the oil will offset that. But we expected first oil in 2018, it never came. We expected it around 2021, it didn't come. We were expecting it in 2025, it is not coming, and we think it will come in 2026. But the oil game is changing. So probably by the time we get the oil, maybe the prices will be, it won't be, an in-demand commodity for a long time. Now you have those challenges with your public debt, but also you have the challenge of politics around debt, that you get money to finance a political project, but then the political project doesn't play out. We have projects like the parish development model, the wealth creation and social protection project, where you think you'll borrow money, spend in the people, then the people become rich, But unfortunately, those people continue to be poor. You give someone money to start up a business, they use it in alcohol and paying school fees. So come next year, the person is not paying money, yet it's a revolving fund. So you're not getting the return on investment, but you're also not getting the actual intention of the loan. But also the fact that when it comes now to fiscal discipline, most of our governments are now becoming highly indisciplined. That when you look at most of our budgets, Ugandans call it white ants. So when you see a sack of white ants, but actually it's the feathers, not the ants themselves, that means you're being duped. So it's a budget that is extremely high, but the actual services and the actual amount that's going to be allocated to services within that budget is extremely low. For example, our 72 trillion budget in Uganda, trillion Ugandan shillings, our actual expenditure is about 40 trillion. So the 32 trillion is feathers of the white ants. You get that? But why some of these governments raise that amount is to get what you call the supplementary expenditure. For us, it's about 3%. So the higher the budget, the higher the 3%. So you come back and you can claim for that. Now, the supplementary expenditure doesn't have much conditions currently. Yet there were strict conditions to fund emergencies and things like that. But now you have a supplementary funding tours and things like that. Funding, of course, the members of parliament, monitoring of government programs, and that's how bad it is. So when it comes to political financing, when it comes to political integrity, when it comes to public financing, I think our eyes must always be open and sharp.
I think in the region we are birds of a feather, because when you listen to what is happening here in Kenya and what is happening in Uganda, it's all the same. But finally, I just wanted to bring to the attention of all in this room. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the process that is going on in Spain currently. We have a big UN conference called Financing for Development, where most of us have gone there, and we were arguing on cancellation of some of these debts. But unfortunately, the civil society has not been given any place in that conference. And what we are doing now, we are on the streets, and we are demanding to be given space in that conference. We had been told that civil society organization would be given between 4 and 8 minutes, but that was removed. So whatever resolutions that are going to come out of Sevilla will not have the input of civil society unless we make noise on the issues of debt. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Jacob, Jacob, I think...
I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry to take you back to the same issue. If you can allow me just...
1 minute.
All right, thank you. I wanted to take you back to the same issue of debt, because I think our parliament at some point put a debt ceiling of about 10 trillion, that it should not exceed 10 trillion. But that one was amended and was replaced with some system, I think it's called a debt anchor system, that our debt should not exceed about 55% of our GDP. So I just wanted to know what was the rationale behind that. And yeah.
Maybe I can respond to that very fast. Initially, when the PFM Act in Kenya was enacted, we had a debt anchor of 55% of GDP. But then our economy at that point was not growing as much, and the debt that we had seemed to exceed 55% of GDP. So the wisdom of our parliament then was, let us have a nominal number, and they moved to 10 trillion. Then our economy started growing, and we found that we are going into the 10 trillion. When we were just about to hit the 10 trillion, or I suppose we had hit, then there was a reversing, and we went back to the debt anchor. However, right now the debt anchor is 55% of GDP, but the actual debt is 65.8% of GDP and growing. Now what is happening within Parliament is we've been told that up to November of next year, we should not ask questions. We should be okay at that level until when we get into 2026 December. That is when our country should have come to the 55% debt anchor. But if you look at the numbers in the medium-term debt strategy paper, it indicates that the only time we are likely to come anywhere near 55% of GDP is around 2034. That assumes that we are not going to acquire new debt. So I think we have our work cut out as civil society.
Thank you. And also on that note, to the civil society actors present, is the issue of money financing is a very highly technical issue, just like the law, because the law it's cultish, as mentioned yesterday, that there are very many rules, regulations, a lot of jargon when it comes to the issues of law and also the issues in this discussion of money. So it's a call to action to our partners in civil society to simplify these conversations for the people so that they can better engage on the topic. Because in my perspective, the June 25th protests last year were an issue because of the high public debt. And that debt and the government was not serving the people. And you know, when it comes to tax, when it's tax o'clock, 2 days ago, we had to file our taxes as Kenyans. They'll be there knocking on your door. And if you fail to file your taxes, you'll be penalized. You'll be penalized. And the issues of money talks, as mentioned earlier. Money really talks. And is democracy just for the rich? Is the people in we the people a rich Kenyan? How can democracy work for the poor Kenyan? And I believe many of us are poor Kenyans because we're one disease away from poverty, as mentioned earlier. How can the people in these democratic spaces be heard? Because in the media, how will we create spaces for us in the media, in such forums here? Because such a forum requires money to bring us all together to have these conversations. How will we have the young people participate in elections and they don't have any money? When will their voice be heard? So as a parting shot, I'd just like to bring that into your attention, that how can we make democracy not just for the rich, but for everybody? Asanteni sana. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. I believe we can end there. For my panelists, we can just stand in front and take a group photo.